What happens when a pioneer woman, beloved by millions, faces a health crisis that changes everything? Drummond has built an empire on warmth, family values, and ranch life authenticity. But behind the scenes, something shifted. Her husband, Lad, the strong, silent cowboy who rarely shows emotion, has been making decisions that have everyone asking questions. From cryptic social media posts to unusual changes at the Drummond Ranch, the signs were there all along. And when the truth finally emerged, it explained everything about why Lad has been saying goodbye to the life they once knew. The ranch that changed overnight. The Drummond Ranch in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, has been operating the same way for over a century. Lad Drummond, like his father and grandfather before him, runs with precision and routine. Cattle are moved at dawn. Fences are mended on schedule, and the rhythm of ranch life doesn't change for anyone or anything. That's why when longtime ranch hands started noticing shifts in 2023, they knew something serious was happening. Lad began delegating responsibilities he'd never let go of before. The man who insisted on personally overseeing every cattle sale suddenly started sending his brothers instead. Morning rounds that he'd done himself for decades were handed off to trusted employees. Some thought he was finally slowing down after that terrifying tractor accident in 2021. But those close to the family knew it was something else entirely. The ranch wasn't changing because Lad wanted it to. It was changing because he needed it to. The Drummond Land and Cattle Company spans over 400,000 acres, making it one of the largest ranches in the United States. Managing an operation of that size requires constant attention and physical presence. For Lad, who'd been working this land since he was old enough to sit on a horse, stepping back wasn't just about adjusting his schedule. It was about fundamentally reimagining his role in a legacy that stretched back generations. Employees who'd worked with Lad for 20-plus years noticed he started leaving the ranch earlier in the afternoons. The man who used to stay out until dark checking on newborn calves or repairing equipment was suddenly home by 4 or 5 in the evening. His truck, usually covered in dust and mud from a full day's work, was cleaner. His boots, typically worn and weathered by the time he walked through the door, showed less wear. These weren't the signs of a man getting lazy. They were the signs of a man making a conscious choice to be somewhere else, with someone who needed him more than the cattle did. The ranch community in Pawhuska is tight-knit. Word travels fast when something's different, especially when it involves the Drummonds. People started speculating. Some thought Lad was dealing with lingering injuries from his accident. Others wondered if financial troubles were forcing changes. A few suspected marriage problems, though anyone who'd seen Lad and together knew that was unlikely. The truth was simpler and more painful than any of the rumors, but it would take months before the full picture became clear. When Ree stopped sharing, Drummond has made a career out of sharing her life. From her blog that started in 2006 to her Food Network show, cookbooks, and constant social media presence, she's been an open book. Her fans knew what she cooked for dinner, which kid was struggling with homework, and every funny thing Lad said over morning coffee. That transparency is what made her relatable to millions. So when the posts started becoming less frequent and more carefully curated, people noticed. The candid kitchen disasters disappeared. The long, rambling stories about ranch mishaps stopped. By late 2023, her Instagram feed looked more like a highlight reel than the authentic glimpse into her life that fans had come to expect. Comment sections filled with worried followers asking if everything was okay. Ree would respond with heart emojis and reassurances, but the woman who used to overshare was suddenly holding back. The Food Network episodes told a similar story. Episodes filmed in 2024 showed a different energy. Ree was still charming and warm, but there was something in her eyes that the camera couldn't hide. Production schedules were adjusted. Filming days were shortened. The woman who could power through 12-hour shoots without breaking a sweat was suddenly needing more breaks, more time, more space. Her blog, The Pioneer Woman, had been updated almost daily for years. It was where she first connected with readers, sharing recipes alongside stories about life with Lad and their kids. The comment section was a community unto itself, with regular readers who'd been following her since the early days. When blog posts became sporadic, those longtime followers knew something was wrong. Rhea had always been upfront about challenges, from the difficulty of balancing work and motherhood to the stress of expanding her business empire. This silence was different. This was protective. The cookbook releases also shifted. Rhea had been publishing cookbooks regularly, each one a bestseller that combined recipes with personal stories and gorgeous photography. But the timeline between releases stretched longer. Promotional tours were scaled back. Book signings at use-a-pack venues were limited to select cities. Publishers were understanding, but fans were confused. The woman who seemed to do everything with endless energy was suddenly pulling back, and nobody outside her inner circle knew why. Her television appearances beyond her own show also decreased. Guest spots on morning shows, cooking segments with other Food Network personalities, and collaborations that she used to jump at were politely declined. Rhea's team cited scheduling conflicts and prior commitments, but the pattern was clear. She was creating boundaries where none had existed before, protecting her time and energy in ways that suggested something deeper was going on. The accident that revealed everything. Before we get to the diagnosis, there's a crucial moment that changed the trajectory of the Drummond family and revealed just how fragile life on a ranch can be. In March of 2021, Ladd and his nephew Caleb were fighting a fire on the ranch when their fire trucks collided. The accident was severe. Caleb was airlifted to a hospital in critical condition. Ladd, being Ladd, refused an ambulance initially and drove himself to the hospital, only for doctors to discover he'd broken his neck in 2 places. The injuries could have been catastrophic. Ladd was told he was incredibly lucky to be walking, talking, and alive. He underwent surgery, wore a neck brace, and was ordered to rest, something foreign to a man who'd worked through broken bones, concussions, and countless other ranch-related injuries over the years. For the first time in his adult life, Ladd was forced to be still, to let others handle the work, to accept help. What nobody talked about much at the time was how this accident affected Rhea. She'd come terrifyingly close to losing her husband, the man she'd built a life with, raised children with, created an empire alongside, had nearly died on their own property doing the work he loved. That kind of near loss changes a person. It makes you reevaluate priorities, consider mortality, and recognize how quickly everything you take for granted can disappear. Rhea did what she always does. She powered through. She took care of Ladd during his recovery, while keeping all her business obligations running. She posted updates that were reassuring and even humorous, framing the accident as just another adventure in their chaotic ranch life. But people close to her noticed the toll it took, the fear that settled in her eyes when Ladd left for work each morning, the way she checked her phone more frequently, waiting for a confirmation that he was safe. The accident left scars that weren't visible but were absolutely real. The diagnosis nobody saw coming. In early 2024, during what should have been a routine checkup, doctors found something concerning. Rhea had been experiencing symptoms she'd brushed off as stress and exhaustion, running multiple businesses, filming a television show, managing a family, and keeping up with ranch life would tire anyone. But the fatigue was different. The headaches were persistent. And when she finally agreed to get thoroughly checked out, the tests revealed a diagnosis that would change everything. The specifics of her condition required immediate attention and a complete restructuring of daily life. Treatment meant long-term management, lifestyle changes, and accepting limitations she'd never had before. For someone who built her brand on doing it all with a smile, this was devastating. But what hit hardest was realizing how much this would affect Ladd and their family dynamic. Rhea's been open about many health struggles over the years, from kidney stones to her foster son's journey. But this was different. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with one surgery or fixed with medication. This was something she would carry for the rest of her life, something that would require Ladd to step into a completely different role than the one he'd always occupied. The diagnosis came with a learning curve that was overwhelming at first. There were medications to manage, side effects to navigate, dietary restrictions to implement, and regular medical appointments that couldn't be missed. For Rhea, who prided herself on being the organizer and problem solver in the family, suddenly being the one who needed organizing and problem solving was a difficult adjustment. She'd spent years taking care of everyone else. Now she was the one who needed care. Doctors explained that stress would make everything worse. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Stress reduction for a woman whose career was built on managing a dozen things simultaneously. The television show, the blog, the cookbooks, the mercantile, social media, and family obligations all created a constant pressure that her body could no longer handle. Something had to give, and it wasn't going to be her health. The treatment plan was aggressive but necessary. It involved specialists in multiple cities, which meant travel that pulled Rhea away from the ranch she loved. Ladd accompanied her to every appointment, sitting in waiting rooms with other worried spouses, listening to medical explanations that were sometimes frightening and often complex. For a man more comfortable with veterinary medicine for cattle than human health issues, it was a steep learning curve. But he learned because that's what partners do. What made the diagnosis particularly challenging was the unpredictability. There would be good days when Rhea felt almost normal, and bad days when getting out of bed felt impossible. Planning became difficult. Commitments had to be made tentatively. The woman who'd built a reputation for reliability and follow-through suddenly couldn't guarantee she'd feel well enough to meet obligations months in advance. That loss of control was almost as difficult as the physical symptoms. Ladd's impossible choice. Ladd Drummond is a fourth-generation cattle rancher. The ranch isn't just his job, it's his identity. It's in his blood the same way it was in his father's and grandfather's. For 50-plus years, his entire life has revolved around that land, those cattle, and the legacy he's supposed to pass down. Walking away from any part of that isn't just difficult. It goes against everything he was raised to believe about duty and responsibility. But when Rhea's diagnosis came, Ladd faced a choice that had nothing to do with cattle or legacy. His wife needed him in ways she never had before. The woman who'd always been the strong one, the organizer, the one who kept everything running, suddenly needed support. And Ladd, the man of few words who shows love through actions rather than speeches, made his decision quickly. He started saying goodbye to the ranch life he'd always known. Not goodbye forever, but goodbye to the version where he spent sunrise to sunset working the land. Goodbye to the assumption that the ranch came first. Always. Goodbye to doing things the way they'd always been done simply, because that's tradition. His brothers took on more responsibility. His children stepped up in new ways. And Ladd carved out space in his life that had never existed before, space dedicated entirely to being present for Rhea. The decision wasn't without conflict. Ladd's father and grandfather had worked the ranch until they physically couldn't anymore. That was the model he'd grown up with, the standard he'd always measured himself against. Choosing to step back while he was still capable felt like failure at first, like he was abandoning a responsibility that had been entrusted to him. It took conversations with Rhea, with his brothers, and probably with himself during long drives across ranch property, to recognize that being present for his wife wasn't failure. It was a different kind of duty, one that mattered just as much, if not more. His brothers, Tim and Todd, were crucial in making this transition possible. They'd always been involved in ranch operations, but now they took on decision-making authority that had previously rested solely with Ladd. Cattle purchases, land management decisions, equipment investments. All the big calls that Ladd used to make alone were now collaborative efforts. This required trust that didn't come easily to a man who'd been the primary decision-maker for decades. But Ladd learned to let go, bit by bit, delegating not out of necessity but out of choice. The financial aspect of stepping back was also significant. The Drummond Ranch is a business, and Ladd's reduced involvement meant trusting others with the economic health of an operation worth millions. Quarterly profits, market timing for cattle sales, negotiating with buyers. These weren't tasks he could afford to mess up, but his brothers proved capable, and the ranch continued thriving even with Ladd's reduced presence. That success made it easier for him to continue prioritizing Rhea's health without guilt that he was damaging the family business. What's remarkable about Ladd's choice is how quietly he made it. There was no public announcement, no dramatic declaration. He simply started showing up differently. Ranch hands noticed. Family noticed. But Ladd didn't feel the need to explain or justify his decisions to anyone outside his immediate circle. His actions spoke of themselves. And for a man who's never been comfortable with extensive conversation, that approach fit perfectly. The financial empire built on authenticity. While Ladd was adjusting ranch operations, Rhea was facing equally difficult decisions about her business empire. You see, By 2024, the Pioneer Woman brand had grown far beyond a blog and cooking show. There was a Mercantile in downtown Pawhuska, a restaurant and retail store that drew visitors from across the country. There was a line of cookware sold at major retailers. There were numerous cookbooks, each a bestseller. There was a Food Network show, now in its 13th season. And there were licensing deals, partnerships, and opportunities that came with being one of the most recognizable names in food media. The empire was worth an estimated $75 million, built entirely on Ree's personality, recipes, and willingness to share her life with the world. But maintaining the empire required constant output. Blog posts, social media updates, cookbook deadlines, filming schedules, and personal appearances all demanded her time and energy, and her diagnosis made it clear that she could no longer sustain that pace. The Mercantile required particularly difficult decisions. The store had become a tourist destination, with fans traveling to Pawhuska specifically to visit. They wanted to meet Ree, take photos with her, and hear stories about ranch life directly from the source. But those interactions, as much as Ree enjoyed them, were exhausting during a time when she needed to conserve energy. The solution was to create more distance. Managers handled day-to-day operations. Ree's personal appearances were scheduled sparingly and planned well in advance. The store remained successful, but it no longer required her constant presence. The Food Network show faced similar adjustments. Filming a season required months of intense work, recipe testing, multiple takes, and the physical stamina to be on camera for hours at a time. Production teams were accommodating, allowing for shorter filming days and more breaks. Episodes were planned in batches, so Ree could film when she felt well and rest when she didn't. The show's format, which had always been casual and home-based, made these adjustments easier than if she'd been working on a more structured program. Cookbook contracts were renegotiated. Deadlines that had been firm became flexible. Publishers understood that the value of a Ree Drummond cookbook wasn't just in the recipes, but in the stories and personalities she brought to each book. Rushing that process to meet arbitrary deadlines would diminish the final product. So everyone agreed to slow down, to prioritize quality over quantity, and to recognize that Ree's health was more important than any publication schedule. What's interesting is how these business changes align with shifts happening across the media landscape. The era of constant content creation and nonstop hustle was giving way to conversations about sustainability and work-life balance. Influencers were burning out. Content creators were talking openly about mental health. And audiences were becoming more understanding when people they followed needed to step back. Ree's decision to slow down, driven by medical necessity, actually positioned her ahead of a cultural shift that was already underway. The financial impact of these changes was less severe than expected. While Ree's output decreased, the value of each project increased. A cookbook released after careful consideration and adequate time performed better than one rushed to market. Television episodes filmed when Ree felt her best were higher quality than ones pushed through during difficult days. The lesson was clear. More isn't always better, and sustainable success requires protecting the source of that success, which in this case was Ree herself. The family shifts everyone noticed. The Drummond kids, now mostly adults, rallied in ways that showed exactly how they were raised. Alex, who'd moved away and started her own life, began making more frequent trips home. Paige adjusted her schedule to help with things her mother used to handle effortlessly. Bryce and Todd, still close to home, took on responsibilities around the ranch and the family businesses that freed up their father's time. What's remarkable is how little they've spoken about it publicly. The Drummonds have always been private about truly personal matters despite their public careers. They share the good moments, the funny stories, the beautiful parts of ranch life. But the hard stuff, the real struggles, those stay within the family. This situation has been no different. Alex, the oldest, had always been close to her mother. The two shared a love of cooking and entertaining, and Alex had appeared on the Pioneer Woman show numerous times. When Ree's health became a concern, Alex made sure to visit more frequently, not for filming or special occasions, but just to be present. She helped with tasks that seemed small but mattered, organizing pantry, prepping ingredients for upcoming recipe tests, or simply keeping her mother company during difficult days. Paige, who'd gone to college and started building her own career, found herself in a unique position. She was old enough to understand the seriousness of her mother's diagnosis, but young enough that seeing her mother struggle was particularly difficult. Paige handled it by staying busy and helpful, taking on administrative tasks for the family businesses, managing social media when her mother didn't have the energy, and being available whenever needed. The crisis matured her in ways that normal young adulthood might not have. Bryce, the only son, had always been close to Ladd and involved with ranch operations. As Ladd pulled back to focus on Ree, Bryce stepped up significantly. He took on physical tasks his father used to handle, participated in decision-making meetings, and proved that the next generation was ready to carry the Drummond ranching legacy forward. His willingness to shoulder more responsibility gave Ladd the freedom to be where he was most needed, by Ree's side. Todd, their foster son who became a permanent part of the family, showed his gratitude for his adoption into the Drummond family by being exactly what they needed during this difficult time. He helped Bryce with ranch work, ran errands, and provided support without needing to be asked. His presence was a reminder that family isn't always about blood. It's about showing up when things get hard. The Drummond children's response to their mother's diagnosis revealed the values Ree and Ladd had instilled over the years. They didn't complain or make the situation about themselves. They didn't air family struggles on social media for sympathy or attention. They simply did what needed to be done, quietly and effectively, the same way they watched their parent handle challenges throughout their lives. What goodbye actually means. When people hear that Ladd is saying goodbye, there's an assumption of finality, but what he's actually saying goodbye to is more nuanced than that. He's saying goodbye to putting work before everything else. Goodbye to the belief that showing up means pushing through no matter what. Goodbye to the old rancher mentality that you work until you drop and never complain. Ree's diagnosis forced both of them to reconsider what matters most. The ranch will continue, run by capable hands and family members who love it as much as Ladd does. The business empire rebuilt will keep going, managed by teams who understand her vision. But the day-to-day sacrifices they've both been making for years, those are what's ending. They're rebuilding their life around new priorities. More time together, less stress, accepting help instead of insisting on doing everything themselves. For two people who spent decades being the strong ones, the providers, the ones everyone else leans on, this role reversal isn't easy. But they're doing it anyway because the alternative, continuing at the same pace and ignoring reality, isn't sustainable. Ladd's version of goodbye includes recognizing that his worth isn't tied solely to his productivity on the ranch. For years, his identity had been wrapped up in being the hardest worker, the first one out in the morning and the last one in at night. The man who never took vacations, never called in sick, never let personal issues interfere with ranch responsibilities. But that version of himself wasn't compatible with being the partner Ree needed now. He started saying yes to things he'd always said no to, taking actual days off, attending events that weren't ranch-related, even traveling with Ree when she needed to see specialists in other cities, something that would have been unthinkable before. Each of these yes required saying goodbye to the rigid structure that had defined his life, and each one was a conscious choice to prioritize his marriage over his work. Ree's version of goodbye was equally challenging. She had to say goodbye to being the person everyone could count on for everything, the friend who always showed up, the business owner who never missed a deadline, the mother who had unlimited energy for her children's needs, the media personality who was always on and ready to perform. Her diagnosis revealed that she'd been running on fumes for longer than she'd admitted, and continuing that way wasn't an option. Together, they're saying goodbye to the unrealistic expectations they'd placed on themselves and each other. The idea that they should be able to handle everything without help. The belief that asking for support is weakness. The pressure to maintain appearances even when things are falling apart behind the scenes. Those beliefs served them for years, helping them build successful careers and a strong family. But those same beliefs were now obstacles to the kind of life they needed to live moving forward. Living with the new reality. As of now, the Drummonds have settled into their adjusted life. Ree still cooks, still shares recipes, still connects with her audience, but on her own terms and timeline. Ladd still works the ranch, still rides horses, still embodies that cowboy spirit, but he's no longer defined solely by it. They've found a balance that works for them, even if it looks nothing like the life they had planned. The tragic diagnosis that could have torn everything apart instead became the catalyst for change they didn't know they needed. It forced conversations about mortality, legacy, and what really matters when everything else is stripped away. And while they'd never have chosen this path, they're walking it together with the same partnership that's defined their marriage since 1996. Their daily routine looks different now. Mornings still start early because that's ingrained after decades of ranch life, but there's less rushing. Ladd makes sure Rhea's taking her medications before he heads out. They eat breakfast together more often, something that used to happen only on special occasions. Small moments of connection that were always important but are now prioritized in ways they weren't before. The ranch work continues, but Ladd's no longer the first one on horseback every morning. His brothers and the ranch hands have established rhythms that work without him being present for every decision. Ladd checks in, offers guidance when needed, and trusts that the operation will run smoothly. That trust, hard-won and carefully built, has given him the freedom to focus on what matters most right now. Rhea's work has become more intentional. Instead of posting content because it's expected or scheduled, she shares when she has something meaningful to say. The quality of her recipes hasn't diminished. If anything, they're better because she's testing them more carefully and sharing only the ones she's truly excited about. Her audience has noticed a shift, and the response has been overwhelmingly supportive. People appreciate authenticity, even when that authenticity means admitting you can't do it all. The Mercantile remains a success, drawing visitors to Pawhuska and providing jobs for locals. But it's no longer dependent on Rhea's constant presence. The team she's built knows how to run the operation, maintain the quality, and create the experience visitors expect. Rhea drops by when she feels up to it, interacts with fans when she has the energy, and trusts her staff to handle everything else. Ladd and Rhea have also started doing things they'd always talk about but never prioritized. They take short trips together. Nothing elaborate, just time away from the ranch and the businesses and the constant demands. Ladd isn't saying goodbye to Rhea or their life together. He's saying goodbye to the version of himself that thought strength meant never slowing down, never asking for help, never putting personal needs above duty. And in doing so, he's showing a different kind of strength entirely, the kind that admits when things need to change and has the courage to actually change them. That's the real story behind the headlines, not an ending, but a transformation. What are your thoughts about the way Ladd Drummond is handling things now? Share with us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.